everyone, it's Luke at Young Writers, and I'm here with a very special guest, Mr. Tom Palmer. So how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. So, firstly, could you give me a little introduction into the wonderful world of Tom Palmer?
Um, well, I'm really lucky. My job is to be a writer, and I write stories and I write about what I'm interested in. And I when I started writing, I came from the fact that I was a very reluctant reader, and I got into reading through my interest, which mainly at the time was football. And that encouraged me to read newspapers, magazines, and books. And gradually, I became a more confident reader. And then when I wanted to start to write, I thought I should write about what I love, write about what I'm interested in. Because if you write about what you know about and what you're passionate about, you're going to write more interesting, entertaining stuff, aren't you? So I started off writing football related series like those two series. Then I did a few more standalone football stories, but I've also had an interest in history. So I started writing sort of First and Second World War stories like Armistice Runner and After the War. And so now I suppose my world is half of it is writing about what I really love, researching, planning, writing and editing stories about stuff that I'm really interested in. And the other half is doing school visits where I either in person or virtually visit schools. And then, of course, I've got the rest of my normal life that's not work, which is good too.
You mentioned, and I read as well elsewhere, really interestingly, that you said when you was younger, you felt like you were falling behind a little bit. You didn't have necessarily the biggest interest in reading, and then found that interest and that love through, as you said, magazines and newspapers. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think that's actually really interesting as to where you are today.
Yeah, it was. I couldn't cope with books. If you'd have given me a book, I wouldn't have even started because I would have known I wouldn't be able to finish. I just didn't have the stamina to read books. And my mum saw this in me and gradually over the years got me reading short things. So like newspaper articles, magazine articles. And before the internet, there was something called teletext, which was like, an old-fashioned internet, let's call it that. And I used to read that. And I said, I hate reading, I don't like reading. But actually, I was reading a lot. I was reading on this teletext thing and in the newspaper. There was probably like a good hour's reading. And I was reading that every night. I was eventually a prolific reader. I just didn't see myself as one. And I think one of the things is that there is this idea that reading newspapers, magazines, comic books, etc. is not proper reading, but it is. If you're reading, and it doesn't have to be a novel. It can be anything you want to read. It's words, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some weird kind of fact or statistic out there or something that if you put on subtitles on TV, it's meant to increase your reading and literacy skills by X amount. And, that's really interesting because that's reading. And you're right. I mean, comic books and short stories, poetry are all things that people take an interest in, but it doesn't quite fit in with the standard, read a Harry Potter 400-page book, but it still helps and counts and goes toward things. I mean, reading the news, I remember when I was younger, like watching the news in the morning, and actually I learned a lot from that, and then reading newspapers and things, as you say. It counts.
I think it was with reading as well, like short things. With writing, like I didn't start writing like novels. I started with diaries, writing a diary, writing short stories, writing poems, and you build up, don't you, through experience, and you build up your stamina that way with reading and writing.
It's like building the confidence as well. I think if you said to anyone who enjoyed writing, go write 500 pages now, off you go, it wouldn't happen. But if you said, write a page today and then write a page tomorrow, it's about getting used to the idea and getting into the swing of it. And I think that's a really, really good way of doing it. That's why it's so interesting. So let's get on to the background that you have, the wonderful blue background. So I noticed that you have, and you mentioned a minute ago, quite the range of interests, and I think that's really, really fascinating. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you write about more in depth? And because you've got the football and you've got the World War II, which are quite worlds apart in some way, and it's
Yeah,
quite interesting to see.
it's, I suppose, like when I started off with football, and it was, the first series was like crime and football, so it's like solving crimes within the world of football, like kidnapped players, murdered managers. It's like, it was called the Football Detective series originally.
Yeah.
Then I did a straightforward playing football series, and but I wanted to do, there's quite a few series like that about a team, and girls and boys, usually boys, but there's more girls books, thankfully, books about girls now, and that sort of that was good. But I wanted to do books to do with being a fan as well, so being a detective who investigates her or his football club, a ghost stories that where some football fans are haunted because not everybody plays, and I wanted to sort of broaden it a bit like that for me, and it went well, and I started stretching myself as a writer by going, right, ghosts and football. Then I did a spies and football, and I thought, what am I doing? Like, I love football, but I kind of want to challenge myself more. And history was the other thing for me. And I just like, I think one of the things was when I was like younger, there was like very few television channels, and every Sunday afternoon there was a World War II film on, the Dam Busters or Spitfires, all that sort of stuff. And that's what we watched, that's what we did in the winter anyway, when we weren't playing football. And that must have sort of ingrained itself into my brain, like as a sort of a narrative that I became interested in. And also I would read those sort of war comic books as well. But I mean, I do write about war. I write about being in the trenches in the First World War, parachuting in the Second World War, being in the Navy. But I'm not, I definitely, it's not about celebrating war. It's about, it's much more complex than that. I hate war. War is disgusting. Like, the more you find out about the First World War, the more just like completely insane it seems that those millions and millions of men just killed each other for years across a few hundred meters of land. But then you read about the Second World War, and you read about the Nazis and how they had to be stopped. And is war ever right? Is war always wrong? And I suppose that's what I try to do in the books, is put my characters into those situations, and they have to work it out themselves. But really it's me trying to work it out, because I don't understand why it happens and how it can stop. And I'm sort of trying it out for myself. And I think that's what a lot of writers do. We're confused, and you can work things out by it's like an experiment, isn't it? Putting your characters through a situation.
I mean, it helps others reading your work as well. You say, you have these questions and you have these thoughts and these processes that you go through whilst writing, but going through that with someone else, whether you're the reader reading your books or you're sharing it with someone else, it helps everyone. And I think with World War I, World War II, I've had my experiences. I've been over to Germany a couple of times and spoken to people over there and visited the sites. And one thing that resonates with a lot of people is that we are getting further and further away from those events, from short-term history to longer term history. Those that were alive during that time are slowly leaving us, and we'll get to a point where it was over 100 years ago as opposed to one lifetime ago. So it's still really important to have those conversations and put them forward. And actually, in your books, you do speak about it, and it is educational, and you do put forward these questions to other people as well, and it helps the next generation that are coming up, bring something that they enjoy reading books into this, and doing it in kind of a positive way that's not just sitting in a history lesson and here are the facts. It opens it up and kind of invites them into the world of thought, and that's something that books always do, and it's really important.
I'm really glad you said that, because I absolutely believe that. And I've found with writing First World War books, it's like I've relied on the recordings of the Imperial War Museum. I listened to recordings of old soldiers, sailors, and airmen, and I developed my stories from that. But because they're all dead, now. But with Holocaust survivors, like this is about Holocaust survivors. It's based on the true story of a group of 300 children who came to this country having lost all their families in the Holocaust, and some of those guys are still alive. And I've been very lucky to meet some of them and talk to them. And the one thing that comes from talking to them is they're very conscious that they're in their late 80s into their 90s, and they're very conscious they're not going to be around for much longer. Most of them have stopped going into schools because it's too exhausting, and they want these stories telling. Like old guys from the Navy have said they want children of the generation now to understand these things, just so that to be aware of it. I mean, with this, like, we're talking about genocide, and we're talking about people being treated differently because of their religion, intolerance, racism, etc. That's a big issue in our country and in the world today. And if there is, it's not a cliche, but we do learn lessons from the past, and if we can hold in mind what these people went through, we're more likely to confront it when it will happen within our lifetimes.
Definitely. So that takes us on to Arctic Star, which came out just this month, came out in May. Tell us a bit about that as well.
Well, my wife made some lovely bunting for me, as you can see, and
love it.
Very attractive, isn't it? About the book though. So during the Second World War, the British, the Americans, the Canadians, and the Commonwealth and Allies were fighting the Germans from the west, sort of from Britain across towards Germany, but the Russians were fighting the Germans from the east, because they became our allies after a little while. And so to defeat the Germans, we had to attack them from both sides. But we had the Americans with us, who had a massive amount of material, but the Russians didn't have much in the way of tanks and planes to attack the Germans with. So we needed to get all that kit up to Russia, but we couldn't go across Germany, obviously. So the Arctic convoys were like convoys of 30, 40, 50 ships that went and carried loads of like tanks and airplanes and fuel and ammunition to Russia on this route. And that's the route. So it goes up from Scotland, up to Iceland, then across. And this is the top of Russia. You can get around the top of Norway, you can get to Russia. There's Murmansk is a port, and there's another one called Archangel. And we used to sail all that kit up there, and that was what they did. But first of all, it was in the Arctic, so it was like massive storms. Ice used to build up on the deck. If you didn't chip it off, your ship would flip, capsize, and you'd all drown. There were U-boats attacking them. There was German battleships, and then there was torpedo airplanes, dive bombing airplanes attacking from the Norwegian coast. And this was all going on. And they lost, I don't know the exact figures, but sometimes some of the convoys lost like a third of the ships on those routes, and it was terrifying. But it kind of needed to happen, otherwise the Germans would have defeated the Russians, then they could have put more forces into defeating us in the west. It's a story of three young sailors who are loosely based on, wait there a minute, this trio, which was a photograph I found of, but younger, of three of the sailors on the Arctic convoys. And I keep a scrapbook when I'm doing a book, just to get an idea of what situations these men found themselves in. Wow. And those pictures really help. And that basically, it's about those three boys, and they're all friends from school in Plymouth, which, as you know, is a very sort of seafaring city. And the things that happen to them, and the strains it puts on their relationships. In researching it as well, I listened to about 100 hours of recordings of sailors who did the Arctic convoys, and it's all based on that, really. You don't need to make stuff up, because it all happened. You just have to find the right stuff, choose it, and put it in your story.
So it's a very well-researched book as well. And I mean, that's really interesting to know that when you're reading it, you know, it's not stretched truth almost. You know, these things happened, and it almost gives that adds to a sense of awe as well when you're reading it and you read these events. And this is definitely, I would say, possibly not the most, talked about event or events throughout World War II. It's not what everyone thinks about when you think of those times. So it's really, really cool to shine a light on this and shine a light on those people that risked everything for that, and educates quite a different angle to the war, and something again that people might not necessarily learn in school. And that's really, really great, because they can read the books and enjoy it and get this knowledge and do something and learn things that they're not going to necessarily get given throughout school. And I think that's really, really cool.
And it is, thank you. And it is a part. I mean, we are a naval country for good or bad, frankly. It's not, it's definitely not all a thing of virtue, is it? But we are a naval country. We need to understand that our history with regards to that. And there isn't much Navy fiction for children, and there is quite a bit for adults, isn't there? There's long fiction series for adults, but not for children. And I don't know, like, and as I said, like the families of some of the guys have got in touch and said positive things, like, thanks for telling this story. So that feels good from my point of view. But I do, as a writer, like, and I know many of your viewers are writers, you have to think about what you want to write, what you enjoy, but you do have to think about what other people want to read. You either have to focus on a key battle or event like the armistice or D-Day that happened in history, or you have to look for the gaps in the market. And as a children's author, the gaps that I see are rugby, which I tried to write some rugby books about, the Navy, and also sports fiction to do with girls, of which is very little. So I do think about what I want to write, and I try to tie that in with what there is a market for, to be honest, what people are going to want to pay money for, which, because it's my job, I need to earn money. And you have to think about, as a writer, you have to think about both those things to be successful as a job.
So speaking of that, we have Arctic Star and that, and then we have, on the other hand, the Euros coming up, which may at first not seem related, but I believe you have some really, really exciting plans coming up for the Euro 2020 or 2021 events. Do you want to tell us about those?
Yeah, so it's I've been working for a few years now with the National Literacy Trust, and during the major tournaments, I write a story, but I write it while the tournament's happening, so it's influenced by the events during the tournament, and then the actual matches, particularly with me being an England fan. I might put a bit of Scotland and Wales in it, but probably mostly England. That it's going to have that in it as well, and I write it the night before it gets published, and then schools read it in the classroom, and so they'll be reading. They might be sat there at 9 o'clock in the morning reading about a match which finished less than 12 hours ago, and they'll be reading it as fiction, and they'll have seen that that penalty miss, and it'll be in my story. And I kind of write it. The children vote for what happens 2 or 3 times during, so it's very live, and it's challenging as a writer.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But you have to have ideas about what the plan might be, but you have to be really flexible. And it's challenge, like sometimes having a challenge as a writer, doing something really out of your comfort zone, you can grow and learn to become a better writer. I've definitely learned to be a better writer by doing these stories that I have to write that evening, and I've got 2 hours to do it, or I'm toast. And it's good to challenge yourself, isn't it? I'm sure.
Yeah, I think personally that would absolutely stress me out. I don't know. I think everyone has these pictures of kind of like young students doing all of their work the night before, and it kind of gives me that that vibe with things happening and having to write about it and having that deadline. I don't know. I feel like there must be some 3 a.m. writing or throughout the night writing going on, or some kind of last minute panic happening.
Well, one of the most tricky things is before it's published, I show it to my wife, and she edits it for me, and she, it can be midnight, and she can be like, no, and I'll be, another couple of hours, I'll be at it till 2 o'clock, and I get inwardly cross about that because I want to go to bed. But I've asked her, I say at the beginning of it, like, you need to challenge me with every chapter and edit me. And if I say I want to go to bed, you have to say, stay up, you've got to finish this
Get
chapter.
coffee.
Yeah, it's great. It's good, and it takes you out of your comfort zone. But like I say, like with running, if you want to become a faster runner, you have to do interval work and force yourself until you're really, really hurting beyond your comfort zone. It's the same with writing as well. You know, it pushes you and makes you grow as a writer too.
Definitely. I think as well, what I find super interesting about it is that, you know, today we are in the age of social media, obviously, and that does encompass writing as well, you know, with like news publications and blogs and everything going up quicker. You know, you can write a blog about something that happened an hour ago, like the football, but what you're doing is really cool because it's kind of taking literacy and writing and combining it almost with the like imminency of social media and putting them together and molding like almost the old and the new together and coming up with this new idea. And I've personally never seen anything or heard about anything like it, and I'm really, really excited to see how it comes out, especially knowing and reading something, knowing that you was probably sat there at midnight the night before, like rushing it out and stressing with a cup of coffee trying to get it done. It just adds so much to it. It adds feeling and it adds event. And when you're part of something like the Euros coming up, it's something that everyone can get behind, and where it's right there as well, it adds to the special feeling that I think everyone's going to get from reading it. So I think it's going to be really, really cool.
Good. I hope you're right. I'll be cursing it while I'm doing it.
Yeah. These fatal last words.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time to chat with us. I think Arctic Star is out now, so you can go and grab that. Also, the Euros are coming up, gosh, very soon, mid-June, I believe they start.
Yeah, 11th of June, yeah.
So, yeah, very, very soon. So that's another big thing coming up. So make sure to check it out. Keep an eye on tompalmer.co.uk. Is that where the work will be going?
That's the one, yeah. Thank you, yeah.
Cool. We'll keep an eye on it as well. And absolutely good luck with it. I hope it doesn't cause too much stress.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on, and all the best with everything.
Yes, you too. All the best. See you later.
See you.